Right, hello everyone. So I'm Sandra Azevedo and I'm with Butte County Office of Education, and I'm doing this mini module on restorative practices when we are considering our students re-entering in person. So it is October of 2020 and we have been on distance learning since March. And so as our students are coming back to school, there's been some questions about how can we use restorative practices to support our students during this time. So I'm intended to make this a really quick training and provide some resources so that you can have this in mind as students are coming back to school. So what are the guiding questions for this module? How can we start implementing restorative practice in our classrooms as students return to school? And what restorative practice strategies might support alternatives to suspension? First, we're going to do a little review. So what are restorative practices? So restorative practices are a framework for building community and for responding to challenging behavior through authentic dialogue, coming to understanding, and making things right. Ted Wachtel is the founder of IARP, and he shares with us that human beings are happier, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to or for them. And so that's the foundation of the restorative practices work. Move that little image up. Okay. So what are the outcomes of restorative practices? Well, to build healthy relationships between educators and students, reduce, prevent, and improve harmful behavior, repair harm and restore positive relationships, resolve conflict, and hold individuals and groups accountable, and address the needs of the school community. So here's a continuum of restorative practices. And on the left, we have affective statements, and that's where we use those I feel statements and we identify what we're feeling during that time. Then there are affective questions, and I will talk about those in more detail a little bit later. We have small impromptu conference, which is just a reminder that we can have small conversations with individuals or groups of people to address whatever is happening. And it's not formal. This ranges from least formal to most formal. Then we have group or circle, and I'll talk more about how we can use circles for community building as well as for responding to challenging behaviors. And then there's formal conference, and I won't be talking about that too much in this setting, but that's that most formal way of coming back together after significant harm has been done. So this is a reminder that restorative practices can fit into a multi-tiered system of support framework. And when we're thinking about using restorative practices in our classrooms and in our schools, we want to be thinking about this framework and emphasizing that tier 1 approach there at the bottom that highlights building community and relationships. And we want that to look like it happens 80% of our time and energy is spent in that way. So how are we using community building circles with students and staff? How are we using those affective questions and statements around positive things, not just around things that are challenging? And then at that tier 2 level, we can use those impromptu conferences as a means to say, hey, something needs to happen. We need some more support here. We need to have a conversation about this. We can use those impromptu conferences or use circles for problem solving and conflict resolution. And then finally at that top, that tier 3 is that more formal restorative conference. So let's talk about building community. So in our classrooms or in our distance learning settings, our goals are to create emotional safety. And that is more important for our students now than ever. We want to encourage respect, teach empathy, and provide a space where all students feel like they belong. So community building circles are a really powerful way to do that. And again, we want to think about using these in a proactive way. So how can we use circles in our classrooms on a really regular basis? And if it's done with regularity, we are also providing consistency and routines to our students. So for example, if they know that every day when they come into class, they're going to experience a circle at a certain time, that's a way of creating routines for them. And it's also an opportunity for you to build in community building activities in that circle. So there's many different things that you can do during that time, and I'll give some examples and resources for what that might look like. So here's an example of a COVID circle conversation that might be something you would want to consider early in the meeting. What is something you are grateful for? What has been the hardest part about social distancing for you? How do you stay in contact with your friends? And what is something important you can do this week to let someone important to know, I think there's a typo there, know that you are thinking of them. So that's an example of a COVID circle. And again, it starts out with a certain type of question, and then it moves into something more deep. So some resources. I love this Circle a Day resource. I'm going to click on it here so you can see it. And it is integrating SEL and restorative practices, which I think is fantastic, of course. And it walks you through the circle process, gives you some sample reminders of how to do that, some strategies for how to use this tool. And then it goes into the 5 different social emotional learning competencies, like self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, social awareness, and responsible decision making. And it provides 3 prompts in a little box that are listed, scaffolded in order, lighter question to a more deeper question that you could use for a circle, and that's connected to that SEL competency. So right now, self-awareness and self-management might be really powerful ones to have. So you could focus on those to start with, and just if you zoom in here into one of these boxes, it will say, what are your strengths? And if one of your personal strengths was a superpower, what would it be? If you had to describe one of your strengths as a body of water, you know, what would you be, if any, and why? That's just one of them there. If you just choose one of these every day, there are so many opportunities in here for you to lean into and connect to the social emotional learning competencies. So that is a great resource. Close that. Circle prompts. This is another like 2-page document with just some general topics. Here's some getting acquainted prompts. Here's some exploring values prompts. Here's some storytelling that we can use to build community. Here's some ways that we can relate it to the curriculum, and then just some additional circle prompts. So that's a very short but loaded document if you need something to go to. I've also listed in here the 3 signature practices for the classroom. And again, this comes from the social emotional learning world, but it makes us think about how we can frame our classrooms as communities and build in openings, thoughtful and considerate openings that build community and welcome people, and then also intentional closings that can do that. And then in the middle, what is the engaging pedagogy that we can do to help foster and facilitate social emotional learning? And while we're talking about restorative practices, these 2 things go hand in hand. When we're building community, when we're building in relational activities and opportunities, whether it comes from the vehicle of social emotional learning or restorative practices, we are trying to create more social capital so that when we have challenging behaviors, at another point, we have relationships that are able to be restored. So considering these 3 signature practices in your classroom is a really great way to help build in community. And it can give you some ideas that you can embed into your circle if you're going to start doing a circle on a regular basis. And this 3 signature practices playbook is like a 62-page document that gives you all kinds of ideas around how to do different openings, middle of the day activities, and closing activities. And then this Circle Forward is a book, and this is just the link to it in Amazon. and it has circle scripts, exactly what to say around a whole host of topics. So I think it's a great resource for your school community to have and be able to pull when you need it, because you don't have to start from scratch. You can just open it up and there is a huge array of circle lesson scripts already done for you. Okay. So let's talk about responding to challenging behavior. So this is the social discipline window that restorative practices utilizes, and it has these two axes, and it has nurturing and warmth and support along the bottom, and control in the vertical position. And what our aim for with restorative practices is to be in that top right corner, which is the with box. And that means that we are high in control and we are high in nurturing and warmth and support. So this helps us think about what that looks like, and we can be intentional about that when we're able to. So 2 is more a punitive approach, where you just tell students, what is being done to them. And neglectful is when we don't do anything. And then permissive is when we are high in that nurturing, but we're not providing the limits or the control elements that are necessary to keep everybody safe. Another tool or framework that restorative practices shares is this compass of shame. And this helps us understand both our own and other people's behavior in a way that I find really helpful. And that is to recognize that when we experience shame, and I want us to think broadly about that. So think about it in terms of discomfort, because we have really specific ideas about shame, but here it's used in a more broader way. So when we experience discomfort, we tend to respond in some of these 4 different ways. Many human beings do this. So some will isolate or withdraw, run and hide. Some might attack themselves. Okay, so we can think about that in terms of our internal scripts where we're having negative self-talk. And then that could also be more severe. We could attack self in more physical ways and self-harm. And so that's something we want to be thinking about. Others will do avoidance. Okay, they'll deny or find ways to kind of disassociate from that discomfort and pain through drug addiction, alcohol, food, maybe thrill seeking. And then there's also the attacking other. And that's where there's going to be some form of aggression, verbal aggression or blaming or physical aggression. So we're often focused on those, right? We really recognize when people are doing that attacking behavior, but sometimes those other ones we don't see as clearly. And we also, what I think it helps us think about is that when individuals are engaging in any of these behaviors, they're really responding to their own internal discomfort. Okay, they're managing their shame and discomfort in a way that all of us do. It's just a matter of degree and preference for where we fall on this compass. And so having that understanding and that lens, I think, can help us be more compassionate and say, oh, I have a tendency when I'm feeling uncomfortable and irritated about something that I'm going to bark at my kids. I'm going to lash out at them, and that's a human behavior, and I can recognize that and have compassion for that, and because I do it too. And so how can we use this framework to help us think about what's happening with our own selves and to think about what's happening with our students, so we can try to help them recognize their own strategies and bring them back. And the way we bring them back to our community and to our relationship is to provide safety, belonging, and this unconditional positive regard that says, even if you're doing these things and I need to set limits and boundaries around that, and there may have to be consequences for that, I understand your human need or your internal discomfort, and I'm here to help support you, and let's find some ways that work for all of us, because it's important for us to have you in this community. So these are the affective questions that we can utilize when something happens. And, you know, for those of you who've been to an IARP training, you get the little card and there's questions on one side versus questions on the other. And so these are meant to be utilized when there's an issue, and you can ask, what happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected by what you've done? In what way have they been affected? And what do you think you need to do to make things right? So a couple details about these questions is that they don't ask, why did you do that? And they work through a past to present to future context. That's really important. And it allows students to take responsibility and to share the learning that they might have. We know that what we want is for students to learn, that punishment isn't the goal. The goal is learning and improvement. And so this can help us see where a student is in that process. The right side here has to help those who've been affected. What did you think when you realized that happened? What impact has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? So those questions allow the kind of person who's been harmed, or what we might have called the victim, to be able to speak about what the experience was for them. Oftentimes this isn't a part of our communities. When somebody does something wrong and there's a punishment, the person who's been victimized in some way has no voice and no opportunity to speak to their own needs and experiences. It also allows for the other person to hear that and hopefully develop some empathy and understanding about how their behavior impacted this other person. And it could be the teacher. It doesn't always have to be another student. It could be a teacher that is impacted when a student disrupts in a significant way during a lesson plan, for example. So these are the questions that you want to have available, and I'll have a little script on a resource for you in just a minute, and practice them. And here they're written really literally, and you can use them like that, but you can also be a little bit flexible in terms of using them if a student answers several of them all at once, right? You don't have to reiterate the question, but just know that the organization of the questions and the way that they're framed are really thoughtfully done and can be really powerful when utilized in this way. So some resources. So this first linked are those affective questions on this one-page document that I found that covers some of the other concepts that we've talked about. But you can see right there are the restorative questions listed and some other nice reminders. Okay, and then this social emotional learning hub, calming rooms, I wanted to share with you, even again, this is integration of social emotional learning, but when we are responding to challenging behaviors in our classrooms, we need tools to help students regulate. And so one of the strategies that you could do is incorporate something like this. And this is virtual, so it can be done virtually, but you could also have it available on classroom computers. And a student could go into this hub. Now you can have actual physical spaces in your rooms would be ideal, where students can go and engage in sensory activities, etc., when they need to calm. But I just wanted to share this tool with you because it's pretty incredible. And you can go here and let's click on, I'm going to click on this sensory room. And then you're entered in, and within that, there are so many resources. You can say, I'm going to go to the red zone room. And again, your students would need to know what the red zone is, but these are things where maybe you are angry and you're feeling rage. And so you can go here and it'll give you some activities you can do while you're in the red room. So here's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 activity for grounding. Okay, so that is just an example of one little activity in there, and there are books and, oh my gosh, so many things. Then you can go back and there's a yoga studio here. You can go to another room here and do a bunch of things to be calm and happy. So just wanted to put this out there and see if that might be something that could be helpful and as a way to help students recenter themselves. And maybe they have somebody there supporting them during that. But again, an alternate to suspension if students are able to learn to self-regulate in some way. And then this final resource here is a responsive circle script. And this is where, you know, if there's some classroom issues that are going on, you know, that everybody's aware of, and you want to come together and have a conversation about that. Maybe there's bullying going on or some ongoing disruptive behavior. Here's a script for how to address it. And it's really specific: first round, second round, third round, fourth round. So you can review that and see if that might be helpful for how to respond to some challenging behavior if it's affecting, you know, more than just one student, but a couple of people or your whole class, and you want some guidance around how to address that. Okay. So I think this is going to be such a challenging time for all of us as we reorient to this, you know, strange experience we're all having. And I hope this provides a little bit of help for you, but please reach out if you need something more specific, if you want some modeling around that. My biggest encouragement would be build in circles on a regular basis. I think they're so powerful, so healing, so much can happen, and that connection and safety for those students will really be a preventative way to, you know, enter into the year. And then also a great way to address things when they come up if they are now already familiar with those. So if you need anything, reach out to me at saazeved@bcoe.org, and thinking of all of you and wishing you well.